Hello and welcome. You're watching NewsX and I'm Megha Sharma, and this is another episode of the series VaKu, India and the World 75 Years. With me on the telecast today is a special guest. His name is Cameron MacKay. He's the ambassador, he's the High Commissioner from Canada to India. It's good to have you, Your Excellency, on the broadcast with us.
Thank you very much for speaking with me today. Thanks, Megha.
Your Excellency, of course, we're talking about 75 years of India and the world, and 75 years specifically of the diplomatic ties that India and Canada have shared. I would like to understand from you, how has the 75-year perspective brought forth the culmination of ties for India and for Canada in the current view of affairs?
Well, we've had 75 years of warm, excellent, growing relations between the two countries. And the first thing I think of when I think of the last 75 years is the next 25. Where will India be at its 100th anniversary? And frankly, I know other Canadians are very excited about the prospect of India becoming even more prosperous in the next 25 years.
And you talk about prosperity, and obviously trade and business is at the helm of affairs when it comes to a number of your provincial ministers coming over here in India. Something similar is taking place in trips that are being made from India to Canada as well. G20 being the focal point, and we are obviously all eagerly awaiting Prime Minister Trudeau's visit over here in India, in Delhi, and several parts where the G20 events and summits are being held. How does this all bring forth the actual plan and the goal that Canada and the Canadian diplomacy is looking at in terms of investing in India, in terms of job creation, in terms of migration laws being more eased, if not at all, which already they are?
So one Earth, one family, one future. What a great motto for India's G20 year. Canada fully supports India's leadership over the next year at the G20. India will absolutely be on the world stage all year, over 200 meetings all across this amazing country. Many Canadians coming to visit at all levels, including ultimately, of course, Prime Minister Trudeau will be back for the summit in September. We really look forward to working with India on all of that. The world is facing so many important challenges right now: an energy crisis, a food security crisis, inflation in many countries, war, and invasion. And so there's a lot to talk about on the global stage, and we want to work with India on that.
That's interesting. Also, the role of India that had been highlighted with the culmination of the Bali G20 that took place, in terms of the global South and the West being brought together on the same table, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi leading the charge in wake of the Ukraine-Russia war that has taken place. What is Canadian stand in terms of making India, or looking forward to India taking a more important and a leading position in the global South in bringing about this closeness and a negotiating role?
Well, India has a huge task in front of it over the next year to try to bring together a global focus on all of these challenges that I mentioned in particular, but absolutely up to the task. We look forward to the leadership of the Prime Minister Modi, Foreign Minister Jai Shankar, the Sherpa Amitabh Kant and Harsh Shringla pulling it all together and making the trains run on time. You just couldn't have a better leadership team to face all these challenges.
Absolutely. Since we're talking about specifics, trade, investment, which are the new areas where Canada and India relationship can further burgeoin in terms of businesses coming together? I know green energy, clean energy is something that's of extreme importance, and there have been a lot of deals that have been done in Europe, in America. There are also talk about AI and machine learning. These are if these are the focal areas, how are you planning to build association in this particular area?
So we currently, between the two countries, have a $100 billion commercial relationship. That's in Canadian dollars. That's led by $70 billion of Canadian portfolio and institutional investment into India. So this is the biggest Canadian pension plans, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, CDPQ from the province of Quebec, investing my pension and the pension of all Canadians here, along with big private equity investors like Fairfax Financial and Brookfield, have collectively invested $70 billion in India so far, principally in infrastructure, real estate, renewable energy, clean and sustainable growth, et cetera, is a priority for many of those investors. So on top of that, we've got a little less than $10 billion a year of trade in goods, a little less than $10 billion a year trade in services, foreign direct investment from Canada into India with Canadian companies who are actually established here in manufacturing, for example, in India. There's about 385 Canadian companies doing business in India now, and over 100 Indian companies doing business in Canada. So this is quite a significant economic relationship.
Yeah.
But any economist who looked at our two multi-trillion-dollar economies would look at that $100 billion figure and say this is a seriously underperforming economic relationship. There's much more that we could be doing together. So we've got a two-pronged approach on that. The first is more introductions, more business-to-business meetings. We have a very active trade team across India. Canadian federal government has 8 offices across the country with 50 trade commissioners that are looking to introduce those businesses so that business can do business starting tomorrow. On top of that, 6 Canadian provinces have staff on the ground here in those various offices, representing the interests of their individual provinces, including to do investment attraction, et cetera. So trade and investment promotion is kind of job one. And at the same time, the two governments have relaunched, actually in March just of this year, our trade ministers relaunched our long languishing trade negotiations. We had initially launched those over 12 years ago.
Yeah.
We made no progress during that time. But since we relaunched in March under the leadership of Minister Piyush Goyal and my trade minister, Mary Eng, with their leadership and their regular communication with one another, we've made more progress since March than we did in the previous 12 years. So we look forward to taking that together. I think the most important thing that the two governments can do to drive more growth, more prosperity, more economic partnership is that treaty-based approach. So we have clear rules of the road for business. They know exactly what the rules are, et cetera, and then they can go about and we'd like to let business do business and grow that $100 billion relationship much, much larger than it is.
We talk about free trade agreement and it has languished for the last decade and more. Things are moving forward in the current dispensation and the situation is ameliorating. What do you think has led to this fast change of pace? And how soon in terms of, is it 2023, 2024? When can we actually see the free trade agreement being signed between both nations?
So the fast change of pace is absolutely led by political leadership. It's political will. It's the two ministers who are committed to getting this done. And I know other members of cabinet on both sides of the relationship would like to see this get done as well. That's what has led to the progress that we've seen so far. We're definitely getting to some of the more difficult issues in the negotiations now. I won't speak of those. So we'll let the negotiators, do the negotiating at the negotiating table. But it'll be political will that helps to get it done. I think there's every reason to think that we can get this done in the first half of 2023. Absolutely. And frankly, if we don't get it done by then, it will be because someone has lost the political will. There's no reason that this deal cannot get done in that time. We've seen how quickly India has launched and concluded negotiations with the UAE, with Australia. We know very well, of course, India negotiating with the European Union and UK at the same time as us. And so it absolutely can get done.
And you talk about political will, but there are also these fringe elements that try to, bring about an upheaval in smooth diplomatic ties and bilateral ties between both nations. I'm talking about, whether there are instances of gurdwaras and temples in Canada that are being, attacked and destroyed. When we talk about the fundamentalist group, extremist group, Khalistani agenda, that again continues to rake up a lot of noise domestically and internationally as well. How can these problems be ironed out?
So I think whenever there are issues or tensions between communities in any country, it's the responsibility of political leaders to lead and to speak out against those tensions and to try to keep calm and peace in the land. And so there's very much a political responsibility there. There's also responsibility for law enforcement officers. You mentioned attacks on temples in Canada. There were some. There were 3 arrests just this last spring, and you did see political leaders absolutely speak out. When these things happen, it's important for us to act, and I think Canada is doing so. The Toronto Police Service was very clear in September. They monitor acts of hate. There are acts of hate in Canada, as there are in every country, but there's been no uptick in that statistically in Canada. we think that Canada remains a very safe place for people from all over the world to build better lives.
What is it that the Canadian government is looking in terms of cooperation and support from the Indian government in allowing for both countries to function together and not allow for these stray instances to impact diplomatic and trade ties between nations? Has there been an impact whatsoever? And if at all, what could be done to iron out these creases?
Well, I think as a good diplomat, of course, my recommendation always to governments is when we have disagreements, when there are tensions of any sort, when there are detailed issues to be sorted out, we have to engage. We need more dialogue. We need to work more closely together. And that's absolutely what Canada's focus is with India and the Indian government.
Okay. I'm going to quickly shift my focus to the Indo-Pacific strategy. And what does it entail in terms of India being topographically and strategically placed in the larger scheme of things in terms of all the upheavals and disruptions that have been also witnessed, and the creation of the Quad and the AUKUS. There was a meeting that was held, which was obviously led by President Biden. This took place in Southeast Asia just a few months ago. And also the Indian Ocean region, and in terms of Australia and Japan and America coming forth, and there's the ASEAN nations, and there's a talk about, a Quad Plus also perhaps coming into force. How does Canada find itself in these larger scheme of things, diplomatically, bilaterally, strategically as well?
Well, I'm so glad you asked, first of all, about our Indo-Pacific strategy, because it was just over a week ago that Canada's foreign minister, after very significant consultations all across Canada, with the support of the Prime Minister and the rest of the Canadian cabinet, announced our new Indo-Pacific strategy. I think Canada recognizes absolutely that the center of the world is once again tilting back toward the Indo-Pacific region in terms of demographics, in terms of economic weight. This is where the future of the planet will be decided in so many ways, and we're committed to being there for that. Roughly 1 in 5 Canadians has roots in the Indo-Pacific region somewhere. And 6 of our 13 largest trading partners are, again, in this region. So we're going to be doubling down our commitment. We will be naming a new special envoy for the region, a new special trade envoy for the region. We're putting our money where our mouth is. It's a $2.3 billion strategy. That's led by $500 million of new investment to help ensure a Canadian naval presence in the region. There's also almost $1 billion for support for infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure and development in the region, more visa services, more diplomats on the ground, more trade missions, and India is going to be a key part of that. I think especially on the trade and the people-to-people side, the strategy absolutely has India as a prominent partner in that regard.
Absolutely. Those are all good news. And obviously both nations are going to embrace, and investment partners are as well. With GDP of India being touted to be at 6.9% today was the estimation that has been made by the World Bank, and also the $10 trillion economy dream that the Prime Minister and the current dispensation hopes for the nation to achieve in the next 25 years. How will association with Canada help that? And also when you're looking at getting industries from Canada into India, what are you looking at? Are you looking at R&D plants? Are you looking at setting up bases over here? And you've traveled to the length and breadth of the country. If you were from Himachal to Coimbatore is where you were recently. How do you see potential and scope to set up bases of Canadian firms and industries and plants over here in India?
Well, again, I'll come back to 385 Canadian companies have already made the decision to do business here. But there are many more waiting in the wings potentially. If the rules of the road could be made clear, if the investment environment is made absolutely crystal clear, if they know that they have an investment protection treaty in place, if they know that the tariffs are clear, that the non-tariff barriers are either eliminated or made very clear, et cetera. This is where a trade agreement and an investment agreement can absolutely help. Because I think once business sees stability, transparency, predictability in the business environment, then business will come and capital will come, and we'll build even closer ties than we have.
Yeah, and you've not just met people in the investment regions, the trade regions. You've also met, like you said, our foreign ministers, our finance ministers is where there have been meetings. You've been meeting governors, you've been meeting chief ministers of various states. And you said there are these, trade tariff barriers that also hinder the progress that saw a complete lapse, a slowdown in terms of those 10, 12 years that led us to a slowing down of the FTA. Now, if specifically you're holding these negotiations with states, and you said, there are your provincial ministers also traveling over here, you have these 8 consulates that are also working, and not just 8, several of them. You have your expand set up through the country. Would this then allow for a better political and diplomatic relationship between both nations? Because it's business and economy that drives the political and the diplomatic ties between two nations.
One of the best pieces of advice I got when I first arrived in Delhi from a senior official at the Ministry of External Affairs was get out of Delhi. Travel. I mean, Delhi is not India. India is just so much more than what we see here in Delhi. Delhi is the national capital. It's very important. Government-to-government relations happen here. But business is typically happening somewhere else. And those people-to-people ties are elsewhere. So we have tremendous Canadian companies. Just last week, I was in Chennai visiting a Canadian software as a service company that has established there. Just a toehold for now, 250 people. Plans to expand that in the future. More Canadian companies will be joining them. Canadian manufacturers around Chennai as well, making everything from auto parts to advanced manufacturing and precision manufacturing in almost every sector you can imagine. Agri-food, food production. We're just everywhere in India. So I really have made it a priority to get out of Delhi, meet them, talk to them, understand what they need to do to grow their business. We'd like to see Canadian business grow here. And I've made this point in some of my speeches. We completely understand Make in India and export to the world. We can contribute to that, including by having the clear rules of the road that I spoke about to help even more Canadian businesses make the decision to come.
Okay, let's also talk about services sector and job creation in Canada, and also the immigration policies for Indians wanting to travel and work and live in Canada. Now, those have already been well established. A large percentage of the Indian nationals have now become second generation, third generation, fourth generation citizens of Canada. And also, do you think there's a healthy competition between America and Canada in terms of seeking out Indian nationals and wanting to relocate them to Canada versus in America, and setting up these bases, service stations, etc., whether you have Tatas or big companies that have already set up base, but also in having that competitive edge towards Canada versus in America, and how can that be further made attractive for an Indian national looking to set up base?
Well, maybe just to come back to your first point about the people-to-people relationship, it is absolutely enormous. There are now 1.8 million Canadians of Indian origin, Indo-Canadians, successful in every walk of life in Canada, from music and film and arts to academia and law and medicine to business and politics, etc. We're going to be growing that number. The Canadian government has made it clear that by 2025, we're looking at increasing our intake of new permanent residents, new Canadians, into the country. Roughly 40% of the permanent residents coming to Canada now are from India. So that's roughly 200,000 a year. But that's just permanent residents. I mean, work visas and business visas, student visas, temporary resident and tourist visas. We process over 10,000 visas a week for Indians who will be moving to Canada under one of these visa schemes. And we plan to be increasing that number. We've been a bit overwhelmed, frankly, post-COVID. We had an enormous backlog. It's taken us a long time to dig through that. And we had a very large and unanticipated surge in travel to Canada this year. But we will get ahead of those backlogs in the coming months, and absolutely we'll be welcoming more and more Indians to Canada. Okay. I'll say that Canada, I think, inarguably has the world's most open immigration system. And we're going to keep it that way. There's a political consensus in Canada for that. All kinds of reasons, to come to Canada. Vis-a-vis the United States of America, our great friend and neighbor, roughly for every Canadian, there are 10 Americans. So we compete, where we can, but frankly, mostly we cooperate with the United States, including through trade. To give you the example of the what used to be called the North American Free Trade Agreement, maybe now we'll call it the new NAFTA. With the United States, we make things together through that trade agreement. That's the kind of relationship we'd like to build with India as well. So it's less about competition and more about cooperation.
Okay, all right, well said. I'm also going to touch upon the subject of China. Now, when it comes to trade and exports that Canada has towards India versus what China has to India. And on several fronts, China has been an adversary, whether it is the military standoffs that we've had or diplomatic standoffs that we witnessed on the global arena. It's also been a rough few years that Canada has witnessed in terms of its association with China. Are supply chains then naturally shifting towards other countries, including in India, and China taking a backseat? And if at all that is not happening already, would that set the pace for the next few years, where India and Canada and potentially become the strategic partners in terms of the free trade agreement that is looking to be signed on the table? And what benefits would both nations share in terms of, if I may, go on a stretch and say, fight the common adversary?
Well, let me say that I think Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy is very clear. There's considerable text there about our views on China. First, it recognizes China as an emerging and disruptive power. And maybe I'll just leave it at that. It's well recognized the challenges that we all face vis-a-vis China. And that creates challenges and difficulties, but also opportunities. And that's exactly why we'd like to be building a closer economic relationship with India, with other countries in the region as well. And again, it's setting the clear rules of the road for business, having greater and greater engagement between our governments, greater cooperation in absolutely every area will help us to face these new challenges.
Also, I'm going to come back to G20, and obviously the highlight is going to be when your Prime Minister Trudeau travels to India mid-September. Are there certain specific deals, MOUs, agreements that are on the table to be signed on the sidelines of the summit with the bilateral that will happen with Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
Well, the summit is still 9 months away. I can only say that I think we're all trying to think as creatively as possible in terms of what is it that we can achieve between now and then that our leaders can discuss at that time that will take our relationship to the next level. And so I look forward to, there will absolutely be some good news at that time. Exactly what it will be, we'll know next September.
Okay, and before I let you go, Your Excellency, how has your 1-year stint in India been? This is not the first time that you visited India. Your wife was also the High Commissioner to India, and that was when you as a tourist would travel to the country. But,
Yes.
but how has your experience been in India in the official capacity of being the High Commissioner from Canada to the country?
Well, like most Canadians, I grew up with Indian friends, eating Indian food. Although I think the biggest challenge I have here is I like Indian food so much that at home in Canada, for me, it would be once a month going to a restaurant with my family. And here I'm eating Indian food almost every day and sort of paying the price for that. But I think, the greatest advantage of this job for me personally is the ability to travel and see the country and meet the people. It is just an outstanding, the tagline for Indian tourism, incredible India, just nothing could be more true.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for joining me on the telecast. The High Commissioner, MacKay, on the telecast with us. It's great to have interviewed you, and I hope to get to have more interactions, particularly with the G20 and all the noise that is going to be created in the right direction, and here hopefully building more of these bridges to allow for Canada and India to work in tandem together for many, many more years, and in the short term, the 25 years to the 10 trillion economy in the country. of India and also the bilateral ties and bilateral trade between both nations to further join.
Absolutely. Thank you very much again, Megha. Look forward to the next time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.